should a coach actually be preparing a player for that hostile environment? And can you do that artificially, or do you need to sort of elicit that kind of stressful state, that competitive, that almost angry environment that they're probably going to have to play out in? And that's going to shape them. You're going to see, is this player going to be able to handle it or not? When we talk about it in the Brene Brown courses, what we'll often say the difference between shame and guilt. Shame being, I am bad, and guilt, I did something bad. And those very strong I am comments can be, if held on for too long, can be very sort of character forming. And maybe the coach feels like they haven't done enough. Why are these mistakes happening on the field? Or they haven't been able to get their message across clearly to the player, and they feel like this is where the anger comes out. But often it's a little bit internal to themselves, and then that's expressed external to the player. And ultimately, is that gonna shut a player down? Are you going to see the best from them?
Hi there, welcome back to the Demystifying Mental Toughness podcast with your host David Charlton. And today, on a glorious, hot, sunny day, 27 degrees apparently in the northeast here, I'm joined by my colleague and friend as well, Duncan O'Brien. Duncan and I were going to unpick blame, shame, guilt, anger, lots of different emotions in a footballing context. Firstly, though, Duncan's going to just explain a little bit about himself and his interest in this area, and then we'll take it from there.
Thanks, Dave. My interest in this area comes strongly or initially from the work of Brene Brown, which I help support programs of, often into the NHS more often than not. And Brene Brown is a great researcher of shame and vulnerability and what it takes to be a brave, daring leader. And I've taken the learnings from that, or I hope I've taken the learnings from that into my mental skills work, which I use with South Shields International Academy at the moment, and hopefully with the domestic academy next season as well. So yeah, that's my sort of introduction to this work, is from Brene Brown, and then I try and see what I can learn and extrapolate from my own life and take it into the football club as well.
I know certainly over the last few years we've had some fascinating conversations on this. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing where this all goes. So yeah, let's explore it. So maybe if we think about football and the fact that mistakes are quite common on the pitch, naturally, when mistakes happen, blame can take place, be it from a teammate, be it from a coach. Then they can experience guilt, perhaps. It can impact their confidence, their bravery to be on the ball, etc., etc. Do you want to just expand a little bit more on that and some of the things that you've come across?
I spent the weekend with my kids watching them play, and then I think about us playing football and what are the kind of environments that we grew up doing our beloved sport of football, and how quite quickly it changes as we move into a more competitive environment where it seems that there's much more in the situation than playing an actual game. And that's where I think the responsibility comes in line with the coach or with each individual player, and they can start to really, get angry about situations and start blaming each other. And how often, from a Brene Brown perspective, things that are often underneath anger is shame. So how these things all start to wind in together, even at the beginning of this conversation. And maybe the coach feels like they haven't done enough. Why are these mistakes happening on the field? Or they haven't been able to get their message across clearly to the player, and they feel like this is where the anger comes out. But often it's a little bit internal to themselves, and then that's expressed external to the player. And ultimately, is that gonna shut a player down? Are you going to see the best from them? It's a great place to start the conversation if that's what we're after in terms of improving the mental skills of a footballer and a staff team around them. What are we after here? What do we really want to have happen? And is kind of blaming, anger, and shaming the best way to get it?
Yeah, no, that is a really good question, because at the end of the day, I would like to think that most coaches would want to have their players go out there and express themselves, to play with bravery and with confidence. So, yeah, as you say, does blame allow that to happen or not?
The more time I've had to spend with players and coaches who've played at a higher level, the more I think they want to help their players coming through, the people that they're sort of mentoring come through, is to help them appreciate that it is going to be tough out there. And the arena that we play in an actual competitive game, how close do we want to make that to a training session, to day-to-day conversations we have with players or with staff? And in terms of, you're going to go out there in the field, you're going to have a bunch of fans, depending on the age group and the level of success you're playing in. It could be anywhere from 100 people to 100,000 people, depending on the level. And not all of them are going to be wanting the best for you. Like, the opposition fans certainly don't want the best for you. They want to take you down and they want you to perform well underneath yourself. So should a coach actually be preparing a player for that hostile environment? And can you do that artificially, or do you need to sort of elicit that kind of stressful state, that competitive, that almost angry environment that they're probably going to have to play out in? And, that's going to shape them. You're going to see, is this player going to be able to handle it or not? Or do we need to have other conversations around when do you expose a player to that level of criticism, that level of emotional intensity? And I think that's going to be different for any given individual because of what they've had happen to them before they got to that stage.
I guess one of the key things there when you're talking about the like game simulation and yeah, adapting your training sessions in that way would be setting out your expectations as a coach to a player. Because if communication is poor and you're just setting up these various different situations and you challenging players, but you're not actually telling them why you're doing it, then to some players, then all those sort of negative emotions and the fact that they might be failing will really take over, won't it?
Yeah, and I think you're right, setting that bigger picture context. Like, this is why. And maybe even this is where I learned that this was important. So you've got that kind of um personal marketing or personal sell to that story. I'm not just saying this because I think it's the way it should be done, or it's happened chance. I'm saying this because I've experienced this at a certain level, and now I appreciate it to be really, really important. But without that bigger picture context, like you're kind of saying in that setup, it could seem as just direct criticism, and it could absolutely shut down a player's ability to actually develop. And all you're going to see is the past in them, how they dealt with stress in the past. And they're probably just going to exhibit those same skills to deal with stress in that situation rather than open them up to change, which in itself is a vulnerable thing to do, and brings a lot of kind of potential shame when we ask ourselves to change anyway. It's like, oh well, I wasn't good enough before, and it's like, no, we're developing here, but it how it's taken, that feedback, how that's all taken is very individual.
You mentioned the word vulnerable there. What's your take on that in terms of if we're going to go down the football coaching route? Again, if you're a football coach who doesn't like to share a great deal about yourself and is, very direct and to the point, is that going to be helpful in some of these situations, or actually is sharing your vulnerabilities as a coach again and communicating in that way a helpful thing?
It's a really great question, and I'm obviously heavily influenced by the amount of times I've been through Brene Brown's material, where to be courageous, there has to be a level of vulnerability. How much you share of how vulnerable you with any given individual depends upon the trust and the situation you have there. But to open ourselves up for change, is we have to engage in a level of vulnerability. Otherwise, if we're just fixed and you know solid as we are, when there's no actual room for change. And if a coach is coming to work with a player and they're struggling to impart their knowledge, get the information across, that can definitely lead to the coach getting in a state of mind where they've only got what they've always had. And if they don't start to open up with that player and go, actually, we're working here together. There's two brains on this situation in a one-to-one. And actually, does the coach know exactly what he needs to say or she needs to say to get that information across to that player? Probably not. Otherwise, they would have just nailed it in the first conversation. They would just had this golden conversation where the player's like, wow, thank you so much. I'm so glad I met you. You know everything about me, and your information is just perfect for me at this moment. But actually, in many situations, we're after more than either the player or the coach has already got. And that requires a level of collaboration, a level of vulnerability for them both to bring the best out of each other. But that can be a pretty dicey situation depending on what the player expects from the coach. Do they expect the coach to know everything? That the coach doesn't make mistakes. It's only the players that make mistakes. Like they don't play out what the coach has said to do. Therefore, it's all on the player. That probably isn't in line with what the coach is thinking, but what is the player thinking in these situations? The coach might be thinking the same thing. It's all on me. If I haven't got my players to play in a certain way, that's my fault. I'm wrong here. So it's an interesting conundrum we often end up in. Is a coach a dictator and telling people exactly what to do, or are they a coach like we might know coaching to be, which is the player or the client we're working with, they're resourceful and they're going to bring something out of themselves by spending time with us that we don't really need to know loads about. We just have to trust that it's there in the right environment with the right support, with the right challenge. Will elicit that change and bring that potential out of them. But it's a really interesting conversation to have.
Okay, I think yeah, we're going to go down. We'll explore this rabbit hole even more. So, right, a couple of things you've said. You've talked a lot about like collaboration there. I guess when I'm thinking about research and resilience, basically what they'll say is if you're going to build a resilient person, a resilient athlete, footballer, coach for that matter, then you've got to get the balance right between being in a supportive environment and a challenging environment. You can't just go straight to challenge. You've got to build up that level of support and rapport. Hey, I'm just thinking about this from a coaching point of view. I know one of your big tools in your toolkit is clean language. Do you think, that is a skill that could really help football coaches learning more about clean language?
Yeah, I mean, when I first got introduced to clean language, I was I was blown away and also felt a little bit sort of, oh, right, even less about me as a coach, even more sort of handing over everything almost other than the process to the client. The content is absolutely all theirs, and they are often eliciting or creating their own metaphorical understanding of the situation, which I think we're continuously doing all the time anyway. Normal conversations, we often, say something is like something. Um, this conversation is a little bit like a creative game of tennis. So I'll give you a bit, you give me a bit, and we'll see what comes out of it and see what shots we play. And clean language definitely offers up an opportunity for an individual to really understand where they're coming from without putting too much pressure on the other person, the coach, to interpret that for them and make meaning of it for them and just continuously help them expand their understanding of themselves, which kind of takes the pressure off in many ways in my experiences. But then if a coach does have a lot of background experience in the field and on the field in the case of football, then that'll constantly want to come in. Anytime they see the player like maybe hesitating, struggling, or they go, I've already done that. Like, this is how I dealt with it, and this will be brilliant for you. And that might be right, but that isn't the purpose of a kind of a clean language conversation. It might be something you do after that. It might be another completely different conversation, or you might weave it in and out with permission. But it's yeah, it's certainly a tool in the toolbox of coaching that I find myself sort of leaning on now and again. And it, as we both know, having experienced it, it's incredible what can come out of that.
And I guess it's a very good tool to be able to explore some of these emotions that we've talked about, because it's very, very easy, isn't it, to assume somebody's feeling a certain way and then actually end up putting your own stuff on them, as you've alluded to. There's a reality as well, though we've got to factor in here is clean language might be a fantastic tool for a coach. However, they're in charge of anywhere between 15, 20, 30 players, and often, certainly at a lower level, they don't have a great deal of time with the players. In clean language, you do need an element of time and patience. So probably that time pressure on the coach means that they're quite direct, doesn't it, and solution orientated in their approach, and they want the quick answer. But then it does beg the question: is that actually helping the decision making of the player?
For me, all of this work that I think me and you love to do is about creating awareness of what's happening in another individual or for another individual, help them appreciate what's going on for them and notice what that might feel like, look like in terms of behavior or sound like in terms of thoughts. And once you're aware of all of that, then it seems you've got an element of choice. Oh, I'm going down that kind of pathway where actually performance doesn't naturally come out of that state of being. And if a coach can begin to help a player understand that, then they've got a chance of doing something slightly different. But like you said, it does take an element of time to understand this as a different form of working with players. And how might we facilitate an environment where players are supporting each other with this stuff, depending on the age group? What would be the language? What would we actually teach first to the players? A bit of teaching in there about how they might have different conversations with each other, so that they ask a question rather than give an order or give a solution, like you said, and being solution focused. Can we encourage players to ask questions of each other rather than give direction and just absolutely scream an order at somebody, or scream a level of disappointment at each other in a challenging situation, which I heard Luca Nine talk about in an interview, saying they were getting beat. I think it was 2-1, maybe against Stoke. And one of the players just came up to him and asked him a question, or he went up to a player and asked him a question. What do you think we should do now? And they all just stopped and had a little bit of a quick reflection. But they were okay with all of that, and instead of being in the panic of the moment, it's like that got them back into the moment. Actually, we've got some power here. We can make some choices here, but it took someone asking a question rather than shouting at somebody to do something different, which is kind of telling them they were wrong for what they were doing before, which isn't a great place to start from often, unless you've got the skills to deal with that.
Yeah, and that's such a simple question as well to ask. I suppose I'd say a half-time break, isn't it? Or if there's just a stoppage in play, what do we need to do now? Or what can we do that's going to help us in the second half? Things like that, rather than boom, boom, boom. You should have done this, you should have done that, and so on. I'm intrigued. If we think about the signs of somebody that might be feeling shame, what is it they would be experiencing?
I know for myself, shame manifests itself in many different ways. Like I can go very silent and want to hide, so that kind of closed down body position. But I could quickly go from shame into anger. And personally, you might see me tearing around the football pitch and wasting energy, getting out of position, giving away, possession of the ball by giving away free kicks. And I think if we start to see that in our players, then there's something going on. How each individual deals with or manifests shame, I think going back to the clean language side of thing, it's one to explore. I don't know how often you explored the world shame at a younger age. I certainly didn't even know what it meant, other than I might have heard I'm ashamed, but it means I've done something bad or something bad has happened in the situation. but it's not a word that was bandied around when I was a young man or growing up.
Yeah, I've just done a Google search very quickly as we're talking there, because you're right. I mean, a lot of people probably wouldn't even know the meaning of the word. So, yeah, Google tells us shame is a painful feeling of humiliation or distress caused by consciousness of wrong or foolish behavior. And then it's got, yeah, a regrettable or unfortunate situation or action. So, right, yeah, so a painful feeling of humiliation. Yeah, it's not. I suppose that's not a good place to be in on the pitch, is it? And I guess, yeah, people will hide when that happens. Communication will be a lot quieter. They're certainly not going to express themselves on the pitch. So yeah, this is probably an important message for coaches and any parents of youngsters. That type of behaviour could be linked to this word shame.
And just hearing you say that the kind of definition of Google, when we talk about it in the Brene Brown courses, what we'll often say the difference between shame and guilt. Shame being I am bad, and guilt I did something bad. And those very strong I am comments can be, if held on for too long, can be very sort of character forming. Whereas I did something bad, I made a mistake, not I am a mistake, which is horrific to kind of feel into. You can work with I did something bad. Okay, what happened then? What might we do differently next time, having learned from that situation? I am bad. I am a mistake. Where do you go with that? Like it really is yeah, you kind of having to wait that out and sort of get very self-compassionate or very empathetic with another human being, try and understand what you're actually saying about yourself there, which is I was blown away when I first was introduced to shame in this kind of way, and I ended up writing a poem about it and realizing where those thoughts and feelings ultimately ended up and what I was telling myself about myself. And it wasn't nice at all. And I realized from that little bit of exploration how often I might drop into that and the kind of behaviors that would come out of that, either with anger or with, almost no energy or low energy, that kind of depressed mood because I am bad or not. I made a mistake. I am a mistake for everything that I've done. And it's just not true when explored. Like it's not true at all. The facts, the facts would tell a different story, but when in that state and in that story, it feels completely different. And I certainly don't feel like playing football.
I'm curious on your thoughts on this episode. As a coach or as an athlete, or even as a psychologist or mental performance coach, what are your experiences of coach-player interactions in football or other sports? Does the team sport dynamic, does it make it a lot different to the coach-athlete relationship in an individual sport? Does the level that you play or coach at get in the way? Yeah, I'm really, really curious. What have you learned? Please do reach out, get in touch with me, either by DM on social media or via email. Also, I've added into the show notes a little bit of information on clean language from the founder, David Grove, a New Zealand-based counselling psychologist. David developed this approach in the 1980s, so it's well recognised, where he was working with trauma victims, particularly war veterans and sexual abuse survivors. Clean language has evolved over time hugely, and it's a question and technique, as you may well have gathered. It goes on to explore a person's experience through their own words and through metaphors. What it goes on to do is minimize the questioner, be that the coach or the psychologist's assumptions or interpretations. As I say, there are some details in the show notes. Lastly, well, you may or may not have noticed that this episode didn't really have a natural ending, and that was purposeful. The reason for this is because I thought I'd try something new. What I've done, I've actually split this episode into two. So next week, you're actually going to hear the second part of our conversation, which is equally, if not more, fascinating. In the meantime, have a fantastic week ahead. And please do email me or DM me with your thoughts. If you enjoyed this episode of the Demystifying Mental Toughness podcast with David Charlton, do check out my website, sport-excellence.co.uk, and my online sport psychology resources.
The Sport-Excellence website has essential resources for anyone looking to build their own mental toughness or the mental toughness of their athletes or teams, or if you want to achieve peak performance more often or optimal functioning. The Sport Excellence website has everything you need to keep moving forward and thrive. So go on, head over to sport-excellence.co.uk to find out more.